The gurgling drone of the pump, a summer's heartbeat. Gone. Then the piercing scream. A woman's face contorted with rage, reflected in the shallow, glittering water of the empty pool. A siren wails in the distance, a lonely promise of chaos. The police car pulls up, its red and blue lights painting the drained concrete basin in a surreal glow. She points a trembling finger, her eyes locked on me, and then the cop's voice, cold and flat, cuts through the humid night. "Sir, she says this is her pool." The first sign of trouble wasn't a scream or a siren. It was the scent of freshly mown grass, a scent Liam had come to associate with a kind of fragile peace. He had spent the last 2 years chasing that smell, chasing the impossible dream of a fresh start. The last house, the last neighborhood, had been a cage of small-town gossip and suffocating familiarity, a place where his son, Noah, was just that kid whose mom left. Here, in this quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac, they were just a family. A new family. A family with a house, and most importantly, a pool. The pool was his magnum opus, a testament to his determination. He'd spent every weekend, every spare cent, and 100 gallons of sweat to transform the neglected, cracked concrete hole into a shimmering sapphire of joy. He remembered the look on Noah's face, the pure, unadulterated awe, the first time the water sparkled in the afternoon sun. That look was his trophy, his victory. He was a project manager, a man who built things, and this was the most important thing he had ever built. He was on the back patio, a cold beer in his hand, watching Noah and his daughter, 8-year-old. Lily, splash and shriek with a happiness that was as real and tangible as the cool water on his skin. His new wife, Jessica, was sitting beside him, a soft smile on her face. Her hand found his, and she squeezed it lightly. This, he thought, was the definition of success. Then the shadow fell over them. Not a cloud, but a woman. His neighbor from across the street. Penelope. She stood at the edge of his property, her arms crossed tightly over a perfectly pressed white blouse. Her posture was one of severe disapproval. Liam had met her once, a brief, awkward introduction. She had offered a single terse word, hello, and then retreated back into her meticulously manicured world. "You've quite a lot of noise over here," she announced, her voice a reedy whine that seemed out of place in the summer air. Liam lowered his sunglasses and offered a friendly, if slightly bewildered, smile. "Kids in the pool. It's summer, you know." "I am aware of the season. It's simply excessive." She gestured vaguely towards the pool, as if it were a noisy, offensive appliance. "My husband and I enjoy our quiet evenings on the patio. The constant splashing and shrieking is rather disruptive." Jessica's hand tightened on his. She gave him a silent warning. "Don't engage." But Liam, a man who prided himself on his ability to negotiate and find common ground, felt a strange, almost paternal need to smooth things over. "I'm sorry," he said genuinely. "We'll try to keep them a little quieter. Maybe after 7? Penelope's gaze was sharp, unblinking. It was the gaze of a woman who had never compromised a single inch of her personal comfort. 7 would be acceptable. She didn't thank him. She didn't smile. She simply turned on her heel and marched back across the street, a stern, disapproving sentinel of the neighborhood. Liam shrugged, a flicker of annoyance already igniting in his gut. Well, that was something. "Don't worry about it," Jessica said, her tone a little too quick, a little too strained. "She's just particular." He let it go. It was a minor blip, a small-town eccentric. Every neighborhood had one, but the blip started to multiply. The next day, he found a meticulously folded note on his front door. It was a copy of the neighborhood HOA rules, highlighted in bright yellow. The highlight pointed to a clause about nuisance noise, and the hours of acceptable recreation. It wasn't a note. It was a formal, passive-aggressive indictment. The day after that, he caught her staring from her kitchen window, a pair of binoculars pressed to her face. When she saw him looking, she didn't flinch. She simply lowered the binoculars, a slow, deliberate motion, a challenge. The real conflict began with the fence. The old, rickety wooden fence that separated their properties was sagging and weathered. Liam had decided to replace it with a brand new cedar fence, a handsome, solid barrier that would provide both privacy and security. He hired a contractor, a local guy named Marcus, who was known for his quality work. The first day, as Marcus and his crew began to tear down the old fence, Penelope materialized at the property line, a small laminated map clutched in her hand. Her husband, a perpetually terrified-looking man named Richard, hovered behind her like a shadow. "I believe you'll find that the fence is on my side of the property line," she announced, her voice trembling with an imagined authority. Marcus, a man who had seen his share of neighborly disputes, just sighed. He held up his own survey map, a professionally drawn document from the city. "Ma'am, we've got the official lines right here. The fence is precisely where it should be. The old one was in the right place. We're just replacing it." Penelope's face went a shade of puce. She held her own map aloft, shaking it slightly. "This is a plat map from the original builder. My husband and I were the first on this block. We know where the line is." "With all due respect, ma'am," Marcus said, his patience wearing thin, "that's not an official survey. We're going by the city records." "I'm calling the city," she declared, her eyes narrowing. "And you will stop this construction immediately. You are trespassing on my land." Liam, who had come out to see what the commotion was, stepped in. He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Penelope, please, let's not do this. The fence is on our property. We've had a survey done. We're just trying to make the neighborhood look nicer." "Nicer? You're attempting to steal my land." The conversation was going nowhere. Marcus, a pragmatic man, just looked at Liam and shrugged. "Boss, we can't work with her yelling at us. You handle it." It took 2 days of phone calls, a certified letter from his lawyer, and an official visit from a city surveyor to prove, unequivocally, that the fence was on Liam's property. The surveyor, a tired-looking man in a hard hat, placed a small orange flag in the ground and looked at Penelope with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "This is the line, ma'am. End of story." Penelope, defeated but not broken, watched the new fence go up, a grim, silent sentry. Liam felt a small, bitter sense of triumph. He had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. The peace of the cul-de-sac was gone, replaced by a cold, watchful animosity. The summer grew hotter, and the pool became the center of their universe. It was a place to escape the suffocating heat, a place of laughter and innocent joy. But every time Liam looked across the street, he saw Penelope's dark silhouette in her window, a silent judge, a chronicler of their happiness. The real tipping point, the moment that would define the rest of their summer, came a week later. Liam was in the kitchen making lunch. Jessica was upstairs on a work call. Noah and Lily were, as usual, in the pool. He heard the sudden, panicked cry from Lily. He dropped the sandwich he was making and ran outside. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. Penelope was standing at the edge of the pool, her hand on the ladder, her face a mask of furious righteousness. Her husband, Richard, was behind her, his eyes darting from side to side, a deer in the headlights. Noah and Lily were huddled in a corner of the pool, their eyes wide with fear, their small bodies trembling. "What the hell is going on?" Liam demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "I am simply observing the safety of this recreational facility," she said, her voice shrill. "It's a hazard. The chlorine levels are likely improper and there is no adult supervision." "I was watching them from the kitchen," Liam growled, stepping between her and the kids. "And you have no business on my property." This is a public health concern, she shrieked. What if one of your children drowns? The liability would be on both of us, as neighbors. Get off my property, Liam said, his voice flat and hard. The air between them felt thick with unspoken threats. Now! Richard, sensing the danger, finally spoke up, his voice barely, a whisper. Penelope, honey, let's go. He's right. Penelope's eyes narrowed, a viper's gaze. She turned to her husband. This is our responsibility. This is our pool. We were the first ones here. Liam froze. The words hung in the air, ridiculous and terrifying. What did you just say? This pool was here when we moved in, she screamed, her composure finally shattering. This property, that pool, it was meant to be a shared amenity for the whole block. They told us, the builder told us. Jessica, her face pale, had come outside and was now standing next to Liam. Penelope, that's insane. This is our property. The pool is on our land. We bought this house. The previous owner, that terrible woman, she put up that fence and claimed it for herself. Penelope was pointing at the new cedar fence, her finger a furious accusation. It's been a travesty for years. My husband and I have been waiting for someone reasonable to move in, someone who would understand. Liam couldn't breathe. The absurdity of it was overwhelming. Reasonable? You're trying to trespass on my property, terrorize my kids, and you're claiming this pool is a community amenity? What builder told you that? The original builder, Mr. Harrison. She said triumphantly. He promised us a neighborhood pool, and you have it. The flashing lights of the police cruiser pulsed across Liam's face, painting him in a surreal tableau of red and blue. The officer who had spoken was a mountain of a man with a face carved from granite and a mustache that drooped over his upper lip like a sad comma. His partner, a younger woman with an observant, no-nonsense expression, stood a few feet back, her hand resting casually on her utility belt. Sir, the first officer repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. Can you explain why you've drained what your neighbor claims is a shared neighborhood asset? Liam's mind raced, trying to find a footing in the absurdity. The air was thick with the scent of wet concrete and Penelope's perfume, a cloying floral smell that seemed to mock the drama unfolding. Officer, with all due respect, that's not what happened. This is my property. I have the deed, the survey, everything. The pool is in my backyard. It's not a shared asset. It's mine. Penelope, a coiled spring of righteous fury, interjected, her voice a piercing shriek. He's lying! Officer, he drained it out of spite! This pool was promised to us! To the whole street! She pointed a trembling manicured finger at the empty basin. Look! He's destroyed it! The poor children of this neighborhood will have nowhere to swim! Penelope, stop! Her husband Richard muttered, his voice barely a breath. He looked as though he was a millimeter away from spontaneously combusting from shame. She ignored him, her attention fixed on the officers, her performance in full swing. What exactly is your evidence, ma'am? The female officer asked, her tone flat. She wasn't looking at Penelope. She was scanning the backyard, her gaze taking in the new cedar fence, the empty pool, the terrified children now peeking out the back door, and finally settling on Liam. Penelope didn't miss a beat. The builder! Mr. Harrison! He told us when we moved in that a community pool was being built. That was the only reason we bought a house here. We have a letter. A letter from him. Liam shook his head, a hollow laugh escaping his lips. A letter? From a builder who's been out of business for 30 years? That's ridiculous. I have a legally binding deed. I have a survey. I own this land. This is harassment. Jessica, who had watched the scene unfold from the patio, now walked over her, face a mask of controlled anger. Officer, my husband is right. We have all the documentation. This woman has been harassing us for weeks. She's been watching our children, leaving notes on our door, and now this. This is about a mental break, not property rights. Penelope's face already flushed with anger, turned a dangerous shade of purple. Mental break! How dare you? You're the ones who are criminal. You stole our pool. We waited for years. For years. The older officer held up a hand. Ma'am, please calm down. We need to see this letter. It's in the house, Penelope declared, a new glint of triumph in her eyes. Richard, get the box. The Harrison box! Richard, with the resigned shuffle of a man who had seen this movie 1,000 times before, went inside. Liam and Jessica exchanged a look of pure disbelief. This was a nightmare. This wasn't real. The older officer turned to Liam. Sir, we're going to need to see your deed and survey as well. For now, we're going to file a report. We'll consult with our legal department. He gestured vaguely at the empty pool. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. But if she has a letter, we have to look at it. Liam was incredulous. You're taking her seriously? She's claiming a swimming pool in my backyard is a shared neighborhood asset based on a letter from a defunct builder, and you're not going to cite her for trespassing and harassment? Sir, she's a resident of this community. She's making a claim. It's our job to investigate. We'll be in touch. The officer's tone was final, the conversation over. He nodded to his partner, who scribbled something down in her notebook. Before they could leave, Richard re-emerged, holding a small, weathered cardboard box. He handed it to Penelope, who fumbled inside and pulled out a single, yellowed piece of paper. She held it like it was the Constitution. Look, she crowed, shoving it into the older officer's face. The Harrison Development Company, a community pool. He promised us. The officer took the letter, his eyes scanning the page. The letterhead was faded, the text a faint, smudged print. The letter, dated over 30 years ago, mentioned the possibility of a future recreational amenity, such as a community pool. Should the development continue as planned? The officer looked up from the paper, his expression unchanged. Ma'am, this is not a legally binding document. It's a promotional flyer. Penelope deflated for a second, then quickly re-inflated. But he promised. He told us it was going to be a pool for everyone. The previous owner, that awful witch, she built a fence and stole it. She stole our pool. The officer handed the letter back. As I said, this is a civil matter. We'll file a report. We'll be in touch. He turned, and with a final hard glance at Liam, he and his partner got back into their cruiser. The silence that followed was deafening. The red and blue lights of the police car receded down the street, leaving them in the dim glow of the streetlights. Penelope stood alone in the middle of the street, her shoulders slumped, her triumphant face now a picture of abject defeat. Liam and Jessica went inside, the children clinging to their legs. They sat in the kitchen, the emptiness of the backyard, a heavy, silent presence. They're taking her seriously, Liam said, the words a bitter lump in his throat. They're not, Liam, Jessica countered, her voice shaking slightly. He said it was a civil matter. It's a non-issue. The police are just covering their bases. It's over. She has a flyer from the 70s. It's not over, he said, his eyes hard. She knows she's wrong, but she's not going to stop. She's going to find another way. He was right. The next morning, Liam was in the kitchen trying to make coffee when Jessica ran into the room, her phone in her hand, her face white. Liam, you have to see this. Oh my God. She held up her phone. It was a Facebook page. The IT Cul-de-sac Community Board was a local hub for neighborhood gossip and events. On the top of the page, pinned by an admin, was a post from Penelope. It was a long, rambling, and emotionally manipulative screed filled with half-truths and outright lies. She had posted a picture of her faded flyer. She had posted a picture of the empty, drained pool with a dramatic caption, "A neighborhood tragedy. A family steals our community pool and then, out of spite, drains it. Our children are crying. Our hopes are shattered. Is this the kind of neighbor we want?" She had added a picture of Noah and Lily in the pool, taken with her binoculars. The caption read, "The children enjoying our pool before it was stolen from them." The comments were a horrifying tapestry of small-town outrage. How can people be so heartless? Stealing a pool from children? That's evil. This is why we need to bring back community oversight. Did you call the police? This is a crime. A few people tried to defend Liam, mentioning the survey and the deed. But Penelope had an army of angry, keyboard-brave neighbors who were ready to believe the worst. The tide of public opinion was turning, and it was turning hard. Liam felt a cold, terrible anger. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. This was a direct attack on his family. His son and daughter, who had already been through so much, were now being used as pawns in her sick game. She had posted their pictures online without permission. He spent the next hour talking to Jessica, his hands shaking. I have to respond. I have to correct the record. Jessica, however, was a step ahead of him. She had already called a lawyer. The lawyer said to do nothing. Don't engage. She's baiting you. Any response you make, she'll just twist it and use it against you. She'll say you're bullying her. This is a civil case, Liam. The best thing we can do is stay quiet. But staying quiet was not in Liam's nature. He was a man who fixed problems. He was a man who negotiated. He couldn't just sit back and let his family be slandered by this deranged woman. He went outside, a grim determination in his face. He walked to the empty pool and stood at the edge, staring into the abyss. He had drained it to take away the source of the conflict. He had thought it would be a final, decisive move, but it had only given her a new weapon, a new, more dangerous stage for her drama. He knew what he had to do. He called his lawyer again. I need to file a harassment order and a restraining order. I want her to stay 100 feet away from my property and my family. Liam, the police report isn't even finalized yet. This will just escalate things. She'll have to be served. It will make this worse. It's already worse, Liam said, his voice hard. She posted my kids' pictures online. She's turning the whole neighborhood against us. I'm not going to sit here and take it. The lawyer sighed. I'll draw up the papers. But this is not going to be a quick or easy fix. You're going to have to prove a pattern of harassment. Liam was ready. He had documented everything. The notes, the binoculars, the trespassing, the police call. It was all a pattern, a clear, malicious pattern. He was going to expose her. He spent the rest of the day meticulously compiling a timeline of Penelope's actions, a cold, hard log of her descent into madness. He felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't just a reaction. This was a counteroffensive. He was in the middle of writing a long, detailed summary of the pool incident when he heard the faint sound of a truck pulling into the cul-de-sac. He looked out the window and saw a beat-up pickup truck pulling up. To Penelope's house, the driver, a skinny tattooed man, got... The words hung in the air, a verbal death blow. Community property. The phrase was a physical weight, crushing the air from Liam's lungs. He stood frozen, the ridiculous image of Penelope, serene and victorious, holding a garden hose over a flimsy kiddie pool inside his empty pool, searing itself into his brain. He looked at the men standing on the curb, the surveyor with his neutral face, and the older man in the faded Harrison Development Company shirt, who now seemed less like a ghost from the past and more like a cruel puppet master. I don't understand, Liam said, the words feeling foreign and small in his own mouth. He walked toward them, his feet feeling heavy and disconnected from his body. The survey, the deed, they're both clear. There's no easement. I bought the house. The pool is ours. The fence was confirmed to be on our property. What are you talking about? The surveyor, a man named Henderson, sighed, rubbing a hand across his tired face. Mr. Harrison here. He was the original developer of this whole tract. He's been looking through his old records. It seems there was a handshake agreement, a verbal covenant, with the original owners of your house and the rest of the cul-de-sac. The plan was to eventually get the 5 feet of land where the pool is located officially designated as a community-owned asset. But the owner, a Mrs. Gable, she died before the paperwork was filed. The fence was a way for her to claim it for herself unofficially. It was a matter of squatters' rights, essentially. Liam's mind reeled. A handshake agreement? Squatters' rights? This wasn't a historical drama. This was a legal battlefield, and he was standing in the middle of it completely unarmed. That's not a legally binding agreement. My deed is what's legally binding. What I have on paper from the city recorder's office is all that matters. Mr. Harrison, a man with a tired, sad smile, stepped forward. I understand your confusion, son, but Mrs. Gable didn't have the legal right to that land. It was still under the umbrella of Harrison Development when she passed away. Your deed, while it shows the property lines as they were drawn, doesn't account for the easement that was never officially relinquished. The property line, as it was originally surveyed, actually cuts through the edge of the pool, and that 5-foot strip, it was always meant to be community property. Penelope, a silent, smug presence until now, finally spoke up, her voice a low, venomous purr. See, I told you. He promised us. We paid for the house on the understanding we'd get a pool. He promised us. Richard, however, finally found his voice. A high-pitched squeak of panic. Penelope, honey, it was a flyer, a flyer. It wasn't a promise. Penelope turned to her husband, her eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying fire. Shut up, Richard. He knows what he promised. He knows the truth. Liam's eyes were locked on Mr. Harrison. Why now? After all these years? Why are you suddenly showing up and saying this now? Harrison looked away, a flicker of something that looked like regret crossing his face. Richard contacted me. He's been trying to clear this up for years. I was in the hospital. A bad heart. It made me think about a lot of things. Loose ends. This was a loose end. A promise I made to the original owners. I had to make it right. Jessica, her face pale, had come to stand beside Liam. She spoke for the first time, her voice low and furious. You're telling us our deed is invalid? You're telling us we bought this house, we put our life savings into this house, and now you're telling us a portion of our land, a portion with a pool we paid for, is actually community property? Based on a verbal agreement? Harrison shook his head. The deed is not invalid. It's a matter of the land having a pre-existing lien, for lack of a better term. The easement. We just never officially cleared it up. We sold the property as it was, with the original fence line, and assumed the new owners would eventually get the deed corrected. Mrs. Gable was supposed to do that, but she didn't. We sold the house to you, Mr. O'Malley, and the easement was still there. It was a mistake, but it's an honest one. A mistake? Jessica's voice was now a sharp, cutting blade. An honest mistake that just cost us a pool and the peace of our home? An honest mistake that's turned a neighbor into a harassing maniac? Do you have any idea what you've done? Mr. Harrison just looked at them, a man burdened by a secret that had finally come to light. He turned to the surveyor. Mr. Henderson will draw up the official documents. He'll get everything straightened out. We'll get the easement officially recorded. We'll get a real plat map of the cul-de-sac. The new line will be drawn. Liam looked at the surveyor. And what does that mean? What does that actually mean for us? Henderson, his voice devoid of emotion, explained. It means the property line will be redrawn. 5 feet of your backyard, where the pool is located, will officially become a community easement. It will be owned by the homeowners association or by the community in general, depending on how you all decide to organize. The fence will have to be moved. The words hit Liam like a physical blow. The fence. The beautiful, new cedar fence he had just paid to have built. The fence that had been a symbol of his ownership, his victory. It was all a lie. He had spent his money, his time, his energy, building a fence that had no right to be where it was. Penelope, now fully aware of Her victory had dropped the hose. The kiddie pool was half full, a sad little blue eye in the center of the drained basin. She walked over to them, her face a mask of triumphant pity. "I knew it," she said, her voice dripping with an insincere kindness. "I knew the truth would come out. We've been so patient, Richard and I. We knew in our hearts the pool was meant for all of us. I'm sorry it came to this, Liam, but it's for the children, all the children in the neighborhood." Liam's jaw was clenched so tight it ached. He was losing. He was losing badly. His act of defiance, draining the pool, had not ended the fight. It had, in a sick, ironic twist, given her the very platform she needed. She was no longer just a crazy neighbor. She was a woman fighting for a promise made to her 30 years ago. The surveyor and Mr. Harrison left, leaving them standing there, exposed and defeated, in their own backyard. Penelope and Richard went back inside, a triumphant duo, the silence. In the cul-de-sac now heavy with their victory. Liam looked at Jessica. Her eyes were filled with tears, but also a cold, cutting anger that was directed entirely at him. "You drained it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You drained it and you told me it was the right thing to do. You told me it was going to stop her. And now you've just proven to everyone that she was right. You just made her a victim. You just gave her our pool." He had no words. He had no defense. He had let his anger, his need for a final, decisive win, blind him. He was a project manager, a problem solver, but he had not solved this problem. He had created a catastrophe. The next few days were a living hell. The Facebook posts from Penelope became more frequent and more detailed. She posted pictures of the kiddie pool in the drained basin, calling it our first step in reclaiming what is ours. She had gathered a small army of neighbors, the original owners, who all had similar stories about Mr. Harrison and the promise of a community pool. The children, once happy and carefree, were now withdrawn. Noah was too scared to go out in the backyard. Lily cried and asked when the mean lady was going to take away her swing set. The peace he had so desperately sought had been shattered. Liam and Jessica had a long, painful conversation with their lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Susan. She listened to their story, the new information about the easement and the builder's testimony. She was quiet for a long time, her face a mask of professional concern. "This is not good," she said finally, adjusting her glasses. "The deed and the survey you have are correct, but the original plat map and the original developer's testimony, that's a real problem. Verbal covenants are hard to prove, but a sworn statement from the man who drew the map? That's a serious legal hurdle. If he's telling the truth, and if we can't find a legal document that proves the easement was either nullified or never existed, then you don't own that piece of land. And your act of draining the pool, it's going to look like an act of vandalism against community property." Liam felt his world crumble. "Vandalism? It's a pool. It's concrete. It's on my land." "It was on your land," Susan corrected gently. "Now it's a matter of public record that it might not be. And you damaged it. The fact that you did it out of spite after she made her claim makes you look incredibly guilty. You played right into her hands." "What can we do?" Jessica asked, her voice tight with desperation. "We fight," Susan said, her eyes now gleaming with a fierce professional fire. "We find out why Mr. Harrison has suddenly decided to make this, right after 30 years. We find out if he has any connection to Penelope. We depose him. We depose Richard. We depose Penelope. We go over every single document with a fine-toothed comb. We find out if this easement was ever actually recorded. And if it wasn't, we argue that it doesn't exist. We file a countersuit for harassment and slander. We don't just sit here and take it." Liam felt a flicker of hope, a small, desperate flame in the darkness. He wasn't helpless. He had a lawyer. He had a plan. He spent the next few days with Susan, going over every detail of the house purchase. They pored over the fine print, the clauses, the city records. They found nothing to contradict the original deed. The easement was a ghost, a promise made. The letter felt impossibly heavy in Liam's hands, a small, brittle ghost from the past that now held the weight of his entire future. The words blurred into a frantic, damning indictment of a man he had just met, a man who had, with a single, self-serving lie, shattered the last semblance of peace in his home. Mr. Harrison wasn't a benevolent truth-teller making good on a decades-old promise. He was a con man, a fraud, and Liam had just walked headlong into a trap he had been setting for 30 years. He knew he couldn't face Jessica yet, not with this raw, furious truth pulsing through him. He went to the basement, to his small, chaotic workshop, a place where he could think. He read the letter again and again. The language was simple, the handwriting shaky, a clear plea for help from an old woman who had been taken advantage of. The date, the name of her lawyer, the specific mention of the canceled check, it was all there. The irrefutable evidence of a crime that had been buried in a cardboard box for decades. Harrison hadn't been making things right. He had been covering his tracks. Richard, in his well-meaning naivety, had been the unwitting accomplice. After an hour of pacing, his mind a whirlwind of anger and vengeful clarity, Liam finally went upstairs. Jessica was in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand, her face turned away from the window that faced the backyard. The silence between them was thick with accusation and unspoken grief. "Jess," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I found something." She didn't turn around. "What? Another flyer? Another copy of the deed? I don't care, Liam. It's too late. It's over. You gave her the ammunition she needed." He walked over and sat beside her, gently taking her hand and placing the folded letter in her palm. "Read it," he said softly. She looked at him, a flicker of tired frustration in her eyes, but she unfolded the paper and began to read. As her eyes scanned the page, her expression shifted. The fatigue gave way to confusion, then to dawning disbelief, and finally a cold, incandescent rage. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a terrible new understanding. "He took her money," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "He promised to fix it and he just ran. He never filed the papers. He just kept the money." "He didn't make a promise, right?" Liam said, his voice hard. "He showed up to make sure no one could ever prove what he did. Richard found him, and instead of a threat, Harrison saw an opportunity to make himself the good guy, to finally put the blame on Mrs. Gable, to make it look like she was the one who stole the pool, not him. Draining the pool. That just made the lie easier to sell." Jessica's hand tightened on his. Her tears, once tears of anger at him, now felt like a cleansing flood. The rift between them, born of his foolish act, was gone. They had a new common enemy, and a new, more dangerous fight ahead. "We need to call Susan," she said, her voice shaking with a righteous fury that matched his own. The next morning, armed with the letter and a newfound determination, they met with their lawyer. Susan read the letter twice, her face a mask of stone-cold professional satisfaction. She held the faded paper as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "This changes everything," she said, her voice low and sharp. "This is not just a countersuit for harassment anymore. This is a lawsuit for fraud against Harrison Development, and it completely invalidates his testimony. This is not a verbal covenant. This is a decades-old scam." "What do we do?" Liam asked, his hands clenched into fists. "We go to war," Susan said, a dangerous glint in her eyes. "We file the lawsuit. We get a copy of the canceled check from the bank, and we get a restraining order against Penelope. She's not a deluded neighbor anymore. She's an active participant in a fraud case. We go public. We expose Harrison. We expose her. We turn their own weapon against them." The plan was a cold, calculated masterpiece of legal strategy. They would not wait for Harrison or Penelope to make the next move. They would make their own. Liam and Jessica spent the next 2 days gathering every scrap of information they could. Liam's meticulous notes on Penelope's harassment, Jessica's screenshots of the community Facebook page, and the powerful evidence of Mrs. Gable's letter. The following afternoon, Liam made a phone call. He didn't call Penelope. He didn't call Richard. He called the head of the neighborhood HOA, a soft-spoken, well-meaning man named Robert. He asked Robert to call an emergency community meeting. He said he had new information that every homeowner needed to hear. That evening, a dozen neighbors gathered in the small cul-de-sac park, a patch of green surrounded by a half-circle of houses. Penelope and Richard were there, standing a little apart from the rest of the group, their faces a mix of wary triumph and nervous expectation. Mr. Harrison was not present, a fact that Susan had predicted. He was not a man who liked to face his victims. Liam stood in the center of the circle, with Jessica by his side. The setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows across their faces. The air was thick with tension and the low hum of nervous chatter. Penelope, ever the opportunist, seized the stage. "I want to thank everyone for coming," she announced, her voice saccharine. "This is a wonderful opportunity to discuss our new community pool, a promise we've been waiting on for so long. We've all been so patient, and now, finally, the truth is coming out. This is all for the children of the neighborhood, a place for all of us to gather, a new beginning." She gestured vaguely toward Liam's empty backyard, a dramatic flourish that was meant to indict him as the villain. But the neighbors were all looking at Liam, waiting for his response. He held up the folded letter. His hands were not shaking, they were steady. He was no longer a man reacting to events. He was a man in control. "I called this meeting," he began, his voice calm and clear, "because I have something important to share with all of you. Something that changes everything you think you know about this pool. This isn't a fight for a community amenity. This isn't about me. This is about a fraud that's been perpetuated on this neighborhood for over 30 years. Penelope's smile wavered. Richard shifted uncomfortably on his feet. The neighbors, however, leaned in, their faces a canvas of genuine curiosity. "I found this in a box of documents from the previous owner, Mrs. Gable. It's a letter she wrote to her lawyer a year before she died. In it, she tells him that she paid Mr. Harrison a significant sum of money to have the easement on the pool officially removed. She paid him to make the pool hers, legally and officially. And he took her money, and he disappeared. He never filed the paperwork. He never had the property line redrawn. He lied to her. He lied to all of you." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Penelope's face, once a mask of smug victory, was now a picture of dawning, horrified realization. The tide had just turned. The roles had just been reversed. "This isn't about me being a bad neighbor," Liam continued, his voice rising with a cold, righteous anger. "This is about a man who stole from an old woman. This is about a lie that he's been trying to cover up for 30 years. He came here with a convenient story about a promise because he was afraid that someone eventually would expose his crime. And I'm here to tell you that this letter, this evidence, is going to do just that." He looked directly at Penelope, whose face was now a ghastly shade of white. Her hands, which had been so confidently on her hips, were now trembling. Her entire narrative, her entire belief system was crumbling before her eyes. "So no," Liam said, his voice final and unyielding. "This isn't about you getting your pool. This is about a man who stole from your neighbor. This is about a crime, and I'm going to make sure that Mr. Harrison finally pays for it." The neighbors were murmuring, their heads shaking not in disdain for Liam, but in disbelief and anger at the man who had created this whole mess. Richard, Penelope's husband, finally found his footing. He stepped forward, a look of pure terror on his face. "Penelope, "You didn't tell me this," he said, his voice a horrified whisper. "You didn't tell me he took her money. You never said anything about a letter." Penelope stared at the ground, a solitary, defeated figure in the center of a crowd. That was no longer her army. The final beat was not justice for Liam, but a shocking public moment of truth that stripped Penelope of her moral authority and began to expose the true villain who had set this entire tragedy in motion. The silence that followed Liam's revelation was more potent than any argument. It was the silence of a truth so big and so damning that it swallowed every lie whole. The neighbors, once a divided audience, now looked at Penelope not as a crusader, but as a misguided pawn in a much darker game. Richard, his face a mask of shock and betrayal, was no longer a shadow, but a man standing on the precipice of a personal crisis. His whispered words, "You didn't tell me this," were the final nail in the coffin of Penelope's public credibility. Penelope didn't scream. She didn't argue. She simply stared at Liam, her eyes wide and vacant, as if he had just spoken, in a foreign language. The story she had lived with, the narrative she had clung to for 30 years, was a beautiful, righteous lie, and he had just shown everyone the ugly truth behind it. Without a word, she turned and walked away, a solitary, defeated figure in the dimming twilight. Richard, after a moment of agonizing hesitation, followed her, his head down, a man whose quiet life had just been turned inside out. The rest of the neighbors didn't immediately rush to apologize. They simply stood there, a group of people who had been duped, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and dawning understanding. A few murmured apologies. Others just shook their heads and drifted away, but the message was clear. The cul-de-sac had a new villain, and it wasn't the man who had drained his pool. The next morning, Liam and Jessica went to the bank with Mrs. Gable's letter. The check was from 31 years ago, and retrieving the original image was a painstaking process, but the bank manager, moved by their story, made it a priority. 2 days later, a certified copy of the canceled check arrived. It was made out to Harrison Development and had been cashed by the company with Mr. Harrison's signature on the back. The proof was irrefutable. Susan, their lawyer, was a woman reborn. "This is a grand slam," she announced, holding the check aloft. "This isn't just a claim of fraud. This is documented proof. We can sue him for criminal fraud, for restitution, and for emotional damages. We can have his company, what's left of it, investigated. He's finished." The news of the lawsuit against Mr. Harrison spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The same community Facebook page that Penelope had used to vilify Liam was now a platform for outrage against the crooked developer. Liam was no longer the villain. He was the hero, a man who had not only stood up for his own family, but for the legacy of an old woman who had been cheated. The resolution, however, was not immediate. Mr. Harrison's lawyer offered a settlement, a measly sum that was meant to silence them. Liam and Jessica, with Susan's counsel, refused. They wanted justice, not just for themselves, but for Mrs. Gable. They wanted to expose the truth, to make a statement that you can't get away with a decades-old crime just because the victim is no longer around to defend herself. The legal battle dragged on for months, a slow, methodical grind that was exhausting but necessary. The truth, however, had already done its work in the neighborhood. Penelope and Richard were a changed couple. Richard, emboldened by the truth and sick of his wife's delusions, had put his foot down. The police reports, the restraining order, and the public humiliation had all been too much. He had demanded that Penelope get help. She still lived across the street, a quieter, more solitary figure. The binoculars were gone. The notes had stopped. She was seen less and less, a fading presence in the once bustling community, the inflatable. Kiddie Pool, once a symbol of her defiance, now sat, deflated and forgotten, at the edge of the drained basin in Liam's backyard. The final piece of the puzzle came from the least expected source. A former employee of Harrison Development, seeing the lawsuit in the paper, came forward. He remembered Mrs. Gable. He remembered Mr. Harrison taking the check. He remembered him laughing about it, saying it was a bonus for his company. He even had a copy of the original plat map that had been corrected to show the easement removed, a map Harrison had created but never filed. The new evidence was the final nail in the coffin. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Mr. Harrison capitulated. He admitted to the fraud, agreed to pay a substantial restitution to Liam and Jessica, and was forced to declare the original easement null and void. The deed, the survey, the property line, it was all legally and officially Liam's. The pool was his. It had always been his. With the legal battle over, a profound, weary peace settled over the cul-de-sac. The drama was gone, replaced by a quiet respect for Liam and Jessica. The neighbors, once so quick to judge, now saw them as the kind of people who fought for what was right, not just for themselves, but for a greater good. The first thing Liam did with the legal victory secure was to call a pool service. He had the drained basin professionally cleaned and inspected. He didn't fill it right away. He just left it there. An empty, stark reminder of the battle they had fought. Then, one sunny Saturday morning, he and Jessica brought out a few bags of cement mix and a new bag of tiles. They began to work on the pool together, fixing the cracks, replacing the broken tiles, and preparing it to be refilled. Noah and Lily watched, a mixture of awe and relief on their faces. Later that afternoon, a timid knock came from the back door. It was Richard. He stood there, holding a six-pack of beer, his face full of an exhaustion that Liam knew all too well. "Liam," he said, his voice quiet. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. For my wife. For me. We didn't. No. Not the whole story. I hope we can just be neighbors now." Liam looked at the man, a man who had been as much a victim of this mess as anyone else. He looked at Jessica, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. He had won. He had won everything. But victory, he realized, didn't have to be vindictive. It could be a chance for a new beginning. He took the beer. "You want to help us lay some tile?" Richard's face broke into a small, fragile smile. He nodded, and together the two men walked to the empty pool. The battle was over. The pool, once a source of endless conflict, was now an empty, silent stage for a truce. They would fill it again, and this time it would be a place of pure, unblemished peace. The pool, once a symbol of conflict, was now a monument to their shared humanity.